Welcome to Excel Magic Trick number 916. Hey, if you want to download this workbook, click on the link below the video. In this video, we have a data set, and it has blanks in it. And we need to do a data validation drop-down list here so we can select from a drop-down and select any one of these names. Let's go ahead and add data validation and see what happens with these blanks, and then see if we can figure out what to do about them. All right, data ribbon, data validation, or the keyboard shortcut, Alt-DL. Now, data validation means, hey, we want to make sure the data that goes into the cell is the correct type. The default is any value, because in Excel, you can type any value in. I'm going to click the drop-down, and whoa, look at this. List. I can, in the source, click and define exactly what I want to go into this cell. Not only that, but there's an in-cell dropdown, and look at this. Ignore blanks. Now, this is only when you're entering data to avoid an error alert, right? So this means if you have a blank, it won't give you an error alert. All right, so let's go ahead and click OK, and click our drop. Oh, man. So Sue, Tom, Phil, and then just like in the data set, 3 blanks and a chin. All right? So that's not what we want. Now we're going to see 2 ways to deal with this. The first way is to understand that data in Excel or databases or any kind of program needs to be set up in what's called a table format. You have the field name at the top, records in row, or in this case we have a single column, so it's just data in row, and you don't want blanks. A good data set does not have blanks. So the best solution is to get rid of these blanks. We'll see there are some formulas that can do this, but they get very complex. So it's best just to have a good data set. Now, this is a small data set, but imagine if you had a big one. It would be a hassle to highlight the blanks using the Control key and then deleting. So here's a trick. You highlight the entire column, however big it is, and then you hit the F5 key, which is go to. Go to just means go to what? Well, I'm going to click Special, and I'm going to say go find all the blanks. Click OK, and voila, it highlights all the blanks. Now we can simply very carefully, any one of the highlighted blank cells, I can right-click and delete. There's also keyboard shortcuts for that also. It's going to be polite and say, where do you want to shift? I'm going to shift up. Now, if you have a data set with formulas and other data, it would destroy the data set. But for us, we have a single column, so it's going to work just fine. And lo and behold, look what happens over here. That data validation had a range of cells, and when we deleted them, it updated perfectly. All right, so that is the way to go. Now, let's go over to this other sheet, Formulas, and talk about what to do here. Now, this is going to be quite complex. We're going to do something called a data extracting formula. We'll see 2 different formulas for that. And then once we get our list of data from this column without the blanks here, we're then going to have to use a define name to name that variable, because this could change depending on what we put over here. That's the advantage of a formula. Then we're going to have to do a define name and use that define name in the dropdown. So again, formulas are only when you absolutely have some unusual situation where you have to have blanks. And you want this dynamic list. So right now, the list over here will say have 6 names. If I type this and hit Enter, the formula will automatically see it and add it to the list. That's why you use formulas. You have to have blanks, and you want something dynamic that's changing all the time. All right. Now, the first thing is we're going to use a lookup function. We're going to use the index, so equals index. An index, give it array. We'll give it the whole range, blanks and everything. And then it's going to want a row number. So I want to talk about getting a row number. And you can imagine what's going to happen right now. As we copy the index down, the row number is first going to be 1, because Sue is the first item in the list. It's not this row number. It's going to need Sue here. And then when it gets down to the next cell, it's going to need, 1, 2, 3, 7. So the 4th item is going to somehow need to have a 7 there. And then 8, 9, 10, and then 10, 11. So as we copy our index formula down, that row number is going to have to know exactly which row the items are in. Now, let's look at this in a few stages. I'm first going to look at the rows function. And this function is great for creating the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4 as you copy a formula down. In essence, incrementing a number. Now, rows, I'm going to say I'm sitting in B2, so I'm going to say B $2 colon B2. Now, the locking the 2 and not the 2 here means this is an expandable range. Let's just check this out. Control Enter. When I copy this down, you could see right here, look at that, it expanded. The 2 is locked, but the 5 is not. Now, what is the rows saying? It's saying how many rows are between 2 and 5? 4. That's going to be one small part of our formula, but a very important part. Right? Now, imagine this index formula over here. That row number argument is somehow going to need 1, 2, 3. But when it gets down to the 4th row, it's going to need to jump to chin. Well, let's just check this out. If our logical test, in essence, because we're going to have this entire array of row numbers inside our formula. But our logical test is going to be, hey, is the cell not blank, right? So we're going to get a true, true, true. All of these will be false, and that will be true. So in essence, given that we're going to have some false in our array of numbers, it's going to say 1, 2, 3, false, 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 7, false, false, 10, 11. We can then, with that array of numbers and falses, use the small function to extract those for our index. All right, let's see how this is going to work. I'm going to say index. I'm going to highlight this whole range here. I'm going to hit the F4 key to lock it, comma, row number. This is the big monster part of this, what's called an array formula. Now I'm going to use the small function. The small function's been around a long time. You can use this particular Formula 1 construction in any version. I'm going to say small. I'm going to try that again, small. Now, small, you give it an array of numbers, and you tell it which small. So as we copy down, we want it to give us the first smallest, the second smallest, the third smallest. Well, remember, we're going to have 1, 2, 3, and a 7. So if we can create that array in the small of row numbers, and then tell the k, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as we copy it down, to extract the row number as we copy down, we'll get what we want. So I'm going to say if. Why if? Because we don't want all the row numbers. We want just the row numbers where there are no blanks. So I'm going to say highlight, F4, and the not comparative operator is less than, greater than. And then I'm going to say double quote, double quote. That says, is anything in there not blank? So I'm going to hit the F9 key to evaluate. True, 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 false. So we see we get our strings of trues and falses that match up to where the data is. Now, if says, give me a logical test. We have a bunch of true and falses. So comma, when we get to the value of true, we're going to want all of these row numbers. Now, I don't want to do row 1, 2, 3 because I literally need to dump into the small all the row numbers. So I have to somehow create 1 to 11 in this argument. So I'm going to say, give me the row. And then lock it F4. Now, row gives me the row 2, 3, 4. So if I highlight this and hit the F9 key, it gives me, that's not what I want, but it's giving me an array of numbers, row numbers in my formula, Control Z. What if I subtract from that? F4. Well, what's row? Row just tells me the row number. What's 2? So that's 2. So watch this. What's 2 minus 2? 0. I'm going to hit the F9 key. Now we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Almost what we want. Control Z. We have to add 1 back in. And now look at that. Inside of our formula, we've created 1 to 11. That's exactly what we need if we were extracting all the numbers. Control Z, but we're not. That little true false will only pick out the rows that we want. Now, the final argument in if is value of false, and we don't need it. If you leave it out, it'll dump falses into the array. Now watch this. F9. And there's the magic. We have, inside the small, created all the possible row numbers we want that correspond to items that are not empty. Control Z. Now, this is an array of numbers, and as I copy the formula down, I want 1, 2, 3, and then 7. And that's where our rows function comes in. I Control Z there, a comma. That K, rows. Remember, what does rows do? It increments numbers as we copy the formula down. So I'm sitting in C2. So I'm going to say C $2 colon C2, close parentheses. Now, close parentheses. There's the K. I'm going to close parentheses on the small. Now watch this. Right now, what do you think it's going to do? It's going to give me the first smallest. So small, when I hit F9, all it's doing is delivering the row number that corresponds to the item in the list that's not blank. Control Z. All right, so there's our row number. That huge monster small if rows just is delivering a row number. I'm going to close parentheses right here. This is an array formula, because in the if is that if logical test argument is expecting a single true or false. We gave it many trues and falses. Because that's an array of values, you have to tell Excel that this is an array formula. And you do that by holding Control, Shift, and Enter. If I just hit Enter and then copy it down, it will not work. Control Z. But if I Control, Shift, and then hit Enter, you are telling Excel, I'm doing an array formula. So Control, Shift, Enter. I just told it I'm doing an array formula. And look up here, those curly brackets. That's Excel telling you, hey, I understood you're doing an array formula. Now I can copy this down. And sure enough, Sue, Tom, Phil, Chin, Fred, Winnie. Now, in this, so we need to get rid of these numbers here. I'm going to do this by testing. And what is it that we're testing? Well, when we get past 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the sixth row, I want to show nothing. So I'm going to say if. And I'm going to use my same number incrementer, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, etc. Anytime that is greater than COUNTA. COUNTA counts non-empty cells. F4. Now, probably it would be smart to put this, at the top of the column here in a separate cell, so we always know how many records there are. But that's no problem. We put it inside the formula. That's our logical test, right? This rows gives me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But when we get down to 7, right, it's going to say, is 7 greater than 6? False. All right? So anytime it's greater, the rows are greater than, what do I want? So that's the logical test. What do I want? When I get past 7, I want to show blank. Comma, and the false is going to be that whole lookup formula. Control, Shift, Enter. Now, in 2010, there's a great, actually, this note is for this other formula. So this is for Formula 1. We're going to see a slight variation on this. All right? And I'm actually going to steal part of this formula. I'm going to steal all of this. Watch this. And the way I'm going to steal it is I'm going to highlight that part, because I'm going to show you a second formula that doesn't require Control, Shift, Enter. I'm going to Control CC. That opens up the clipboard. If that's not working, you need to do your options to use Control CC. You can also get your clipboard right here. Now I want to copy this. I'm going to Control C, and then I'm going to copy this row construction. Remember, that determines where things are not blank. This determines where all the rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So I'm going to Control C. And then this is my number incrementer. And I'm going to click Escape. Now I'm going to come here, and I'm going to use the index. I'm going to highlight this range. F4. Comma, and instead of for row number using small, you can use the aggregate. Now the aggregate is a new function in 2010. It actually has lots of functions. And down at the bottom, we see large, small. 14 to 19 are functions inside the aggregate that can handle array formula. So I'm going to select 15 for small. In essence, I'm just using the small, but a newer small that can handle those arrays. I also want to ignore errors, because I'm going to get some divide by 0 errors, comma, and here's the array. Notice the K. The array is just like we created over there, except for we're not going to use the if function. I'm going to, in parentheses, take the numbers 1 to 11. I'm still in this array. Right now, if I highlight this and hit the F9, I can see I got the 1 to 11, Control Z. And I'm going to divide it by, in parentheses, the test to see whether or not a cell is empty. Right? And so now if I go like this, F9, I get trues and falses. Well, what happens in Excel formulas is if you do an operation, a math operation on a true, that becomes a 1. If you do a math operation on a false, it becomes a 0. Well, are you allowed to divide by 0? No way. Control Z. So when I highlight this whole little bit here and hit F9, it's similar to the other formula. Now, instead of false, we see divide by 0. 1, 2, 3, 7, 10, 11. That 6 right there will avoid the divide by 0 errors. Control Z. So it's similar but different. The advantage to aggregate is you don't have to use Control Shift Enter. All right, and guess what? Array, comma, the K are number incrementers. So as we copy it down, I can see I forgot a parentheses there. As we copy it down, we'll get the first, second, third, fourth, etc. Close parentheses. On, you can see there's a green one, so that's the aggregate. And you can also see that the index screen tip comes up, so row number. I'm going to close parentheses. Now I don't have to Control Shift Enter, just Control Enter. I'm going to copy it down. Oh, we get the same num error, but we're in 2010. Started in 2007, the if error. If error, it just does that whole big thing, and if it comes out to an error, the if error is polite. You type a comma and then tell it what to put there. Double quote for show me nothing. No Control Shift Enter, just Control Enter, and then double click and send it down. All right, and so now if we change this, add something here, it updates. Now it's not sorting it. There are other formulas we could use for sorting, but it is extracting them just the way we have them in our list and avoiding the blanks. Now, if that's not complicated enough, now we need to use just these names over here. But if it's always changing, right, then we need something dynamic, some way of dynamically asking how many rows there are and then creating a range that big. If I add Timmy here, it needs to have 7. Well, the index function can look up a cell reference. So here's what we're going to do. I'm actually going to create, let's see, I'll do it down here. I'm going to create a formula in the cells, and then I'm going to go up to define names and paste that formula into define names. Now, this range, that's going to be a dynamic range, it's always going to start with C2 or D2. I'm actually going to use this one. So it's always going to start at D2. So I'm going to click on D2, and then I'm going to type a colon. When I type a colon, it always puts a second D2 in, so I'm going to delete that. And then I'm going to lock this using the F4 key. Now, right now, this is almost a range, right? We got the start range. The colon says I am a range of cells, and we need the end. But we need something that'll look up the last cell reference. Right now, it needs to look up D8. If I were to get rid of Timmy, it would have to look up D7. Well, guess what? The index function can look up a cell reference. Index. Well, how does index? We just saw over here the index is looking up stuff from the cells, not the cell reference. The fact that we put a colon here and there's a starting cell reference, the index is then in the context of a cell reference. Index is programmed when it sees a colon before it and a cell reference here to not look up the value, but to look up the cell reference. So here, when we create this, it's not going to look up Winnie. It's going to look up D7. All right, now the array is all of these. F4 to lock it, comma. Now, we need to figure out which row. And there's a twist here. this formula that we copied down, we can see there's letters here, but in that cell right there is a double quote, double quote. It's called a null text string. So we have to be careful about that because some formulas will count a null text string, double quote, as something. We can't use COUNTA. In fact, we could use COUNTA, right? That counts non-empty cells. If I highlight this and hit the F9 key, it'll say 13 because that cell and that cell they're not empty. They have a double quote. So instead, we're going to use COUNTIF. And I'm going to highlight this whole range. And I need to somehow, F4, our criteria is going to have to be count if there's one character or more. So I'm going to double quote, and I'm going to use wildcards. Question mark means one character. Asterisk is a wildcard that means as many as you want. So this criteria right here is a way of telling COUNTIF, count only when there's one or more characters. All right, so let's try this. Let's hit the highlight it and hit the F9. Oh, that is so cool. 7. Count if with a 2 wildcards. Single character, as many as you want. And let's check this out. If I highlight just the index, watch what happens. F9. Winnie. I thought I just said that it looks up the cell reference. Control Z. Well, I highlighted it without the colon and cell reference. Now, if I highlight this and hit the F9, you'll see it'll give me all the names. If you were to do it in Formula Evaluator, I think you'd see the actual range, bookend cell references. But that's it. Control Z. That formula right there, Control C, is our dynamic range. And by the way, we could come over here and test it, right? Delete. F9. It doesn't have Timmy. That is just awesome. Escape. Right? It gives me a value because this is delivering an array of values. But we're going to copy this. If you use Control-Shift-Enter, it will show the first one. All right, now we need to go to Define Names. Define Names is under Formulas, Name Manager, right? Or Control F3. Control F3. Right, and I'm going to say New, and I'm going to say Dynamic D Range. And I'm going to highlight this down here. Type Control V. Maybe go to the edge here and see. Very carefully. Now this gets trickier. I'm going to click and drag and not let go. Be very careful. All right. Looks like it's working. Click OK. I'm going to click right here. This is a great trick. Click and see if it's working. It looks like it is. Click close. If I change this to Timmy, that works. Control F3 to test it. I select my range. I click this little collapse button. And look at that. The dancing ants are going around the correct range. Escape, escape, escape. I come over here. Alt-DL, Tab, L for list, Tab, and then you either type it out equals D range, I think, if you can remember it, or you can use the F3 key to get your list of names and then double click it. Click OK. And so now this is horribly nasty. There's Timmy. There's Tom. And now when I delete both of these, this changes and our drop down changes. That was a lot of Excel to do something seemingly so simple. Avoid blanks in a data validation drop down. All right, we'll see you next trick.